Welcome to Kitchen Sink Dharma, and today I want to talk about equanimity. And when I say equanimity, I mean our capacity to just remain steady and composed whatever happens to be going on around us. And also about how that's really the goal of my practice. Now, you're probably familiar with the term nirvana, and the word in Pali is nibbana with two B's. A lot of people tend to think of nirvana or nibbana as a Buddhist heaven. It's like a kind of Valhalla or paradise or something, some kind of afterlife. And that's certainly what I used to think. And it's perfectly possible to see it that way. And in traditional forms of Buddhism, there's a version of Nibbana that's understood to be something that we attain on the death of the body. It's described as a reality that exists outside of consciousness, something that's completely separate from the world of conditions. And I don't want to dismiss that aspect of Buddhism, and it's important to millions of Buddhists. And there is support for this framing of Nibbana in the scriptures, but I don't want to teach it either because it's not something I can speak about from experience. And actually what I'm much more interested in is Nibbana in this life. And it's about how we live in this world, how we practice Nibbana. Because there's also support in the early scriptures for Nibbana as being perfected equanimity. In other words, complete balance and steadiness in the midst of absolutely everything. So you can think of Nibbana as a kind of unshakable, stable equanimity. It's the way of being in the world that's loving and compassionate and completely free from delusion and confusion. And it's this kind of freedom which is the reason why I practice. So personally, I'm not practicing for Nibbana in a later life, in a subsequent life. I'm practicing for it in this life. So let's talk about equanimity and why this kind of steadiness is so central to Buddhist teachings. And you'll notice it often features at the end of a list. There's various lists within Buddhism, like the Brahma-viharas and the factors of awakening, the paramitas. And the last item on all of these lists is equanimity. And there's a reason for that, because equanimity is the direction that we're going in. So one of my teachers, Christina Feldman, describes it as the North Star. And in insight meditation, it's kind of the whole point of our practice. And you can take it as far as you like. You can travel a little way or you can travel a long way in that direction. So you can cultivate a little bit of equanimity because you want to reduce your reactivity, you want to reduce your stress. Or you can use it as the foundation for a whole spiritual exploration. And that's up to you. And if I'm being completely honest, I don't know where I'll get to on that road, whether my equanimity will ever be completely unshakable. But I do know that there's a lot of benefits of practicing this, and it leads to more kindness and more patience and just less irritation with the world. So like most people, my equanimity has been tested by all sorts of circumstances, sometimes life-shattering circumstances. And my practice has helped me to face those circumstances with a degree of stability. So that's what I'm talking about. It's not hard to practice equanimity when everything's going your way. Most of us can manage that. The actual true test of your practice happens when things get really difficult. And that's also one of the best times to develop your capacity for equanimity. So when we feel lost, when we feel knocked or off balance, when we're hurt, that's when a lot of the growth happens. And that's when we really get to practice equanimity. So this is, as I said, this is a direction that our practice is pointing towards. And equanimity is what really starts to emerge when we stop arguing with reality. It's what arises when we understand impermanence, for example, when we embrace the uncertainty and the changeability of all things. And when we understand that our self is not a fixed, solid thing, but just a process, an ever-changing process. And when we understand there's nothing really solid to hold on to. And equanimity also comes from a really profound recognition of the way that everything's interconnected. So when we understand that, that's when equanimity arises. Conditions for it to arise and exist quite naturally. And it might be useful briefly to talk about what equanimity isn't. So it's definitely not indifference, it's not apathy. Indifference is not the same as equanimity. Indifference is really a subtle form of pushing things away. It's a subtle form of aversion. Equanimity is not like that. It's got a sense of care and friendliness. It actually arises from a deep compassion, a deep understanding. So we're not ignoring our experience or just tolerating it. It's so much more than just the ability to tolerate the ups and downs. It's not even endurance or fortitude. It's more like the ability to stand in the middle of everything with an open heart. And sometimes when you need them, it's got dimensions of fearlessness and steadfastness, but always the ability to maintain balance. Whatever's going on, actually being able to stand in the midst of the ever-changing conditions of our lives. So we could think of equanimity as being like an oak tree. It's deeply, deeply rooted in the earth, but it's flexible in the face of a storm. So equanimity doesn't make us unfeeling or uncaring. It just means we're able to bend and creak in the storm without being completely destroyed by it. And equanimity is particularly important in the whole realm of human relationships, because it allows us to love somebody without actually needing them to be a particular way all the time. So it allows us to care for others just as they are, without feeling disappointed by them or let down by them if they don't do what we expect. And the great thing is it's a capacity that's already in us. It's already available to us. The truth is we can't always access it, because sometimes we're not equanimous. We keep reacting to everything. We keep taking everything personally. And this is because we're caught up in patterns. We're caught up in habits of mind that we can't easily drop. And by habits and patterns, I mean things like our tendency to compare ourselves to other people. Like the fact that we're so drawn to drama, the fact that whatever we have, we always want more. Another example is the way that we ruminate about things that we can't control. So the need to try and control things that are outside of our control is an interesting one, because it more or less guarantees that we're going to suffer. And we find it everywhere. We can even actually bring it into our meditation practice. When we practice sitting meditation or walking meditation, we can still obsess about doing it right. Is my posture okay? Am I walking slowly enough? Am I moving the way I'm supposed to be moving? And there's no equanimity in that at all. And the absence of equanimity is a bit like an addiction. So I can remember when I was a child, my parents used to warn me about smoking. They said it was particularly dangerous because it was addictive. And they said once you start, it's very difficult to stop. And I thought, adults are so stupid. Can't be that hard to stop smoking. Well, if you want to stop, why don't you just stop? Don't even have to do anything, you just stop. And of course, later on, when I got older, I became a smoker for a while. And I realized it wasn't that easy to stop, actually, because we're creatures of habit. And habits can be stronger than willpower. And some patterns and habits wear a deep groove in the mind. And suffering's just like smoking. In theory, you can just stop. But we don't, because the mind plays tricks on us. So equanimity and freedom and peace are available to us. They're right here. We just need to stop taking everything personally, but we don't stop. And just as it took me a while to give up smoking, I tried lots of times in my teens, but my willpower wasn't really up to it. When I did, it was actually quite easy because the time was right and I was ready. I just became disenchanted with smoking. And just as we can become disenchanted with something like that, we can become disenchanted with the whole treadmill of dissatisfaction. We can just get a bit sick of it. We can get a bit sick of the patterns and habits that torment us. And those habits are not you. They're not who you are. And when you notice yourself reacting to something, it's not you. It's just a pattern. It's just a movement of energy. It's just a fleeting reaction. And 1 minute it's there and the next minute it's gone. And you don't have to identify with it. And to see that means to be free. So anger and desire are not going to stop arising in us. It's just the way that our brains and bodies are wired. But if we treat them as passing storms, if we can bend in the wind like the oak tree, we don't have to identify with the storms. And that's equanimity, that's liberation. So allowing any agitation that comes up in us just to arise and disappear is freedom. This is not something we talk about much in our culture. It's not given much value. If anything, it's seen as being a bit boring. But equanimity is anything but that. It's not boring. It allows us to be creative. It allows us to be fully alive. It means we can move gracefully through our lives, and it doesn't stop us acting when there's injustice or harm. It just means that our actions come from a place of love and not hate. So if it ever feels like life is holding you down, or the whole world is standing between you and happiness, maybe that's true, Or maybe there's something else going on. There might be other people keeping us down, but I think mostly we keep ourselves down. And I think maybe the main thing that's making us unhappy a lot of the time is our own patterns and habits of suffering. The same thing that's stopping us from appreciating the richness of life as it unfolds before us. So how about if we carry on doing what we do, maybe changing those conditions in our lives that we need to change, but at the same time cultivating equanimity, training ourselves in equanimity. We can do this in our daily lives, in our work, in our relationships, and we can cultivate it in our formal practice. So instead of trying to be perfect, instead of trying to be the perfect meditator, moving gracefully or sitting in a perfect lotus position, we can just try asking the body, how do you want to sit? How do you want to move? What do you need right now? And with equanimity, we don't leave compassion behind, we don't leave friendliness behind, we don't twist ourselves into a knot, trying to be perfect or trying to deny our own needs, pretending that we're something that we're not. We just simply allow ourselves some peace. So that's this week's episode of Kitchen Sink Dharma, and thanks for joining me, and I'll hopefully see you next time.